Coming up on Mountain News at 5:30, clerks, poll workers, and other election officials are preparing for Tuesday's midterms. But is the campaigning for swing voters over for candidates? And disputes of the 2020 presidential election results have led some to become skeptical of our democratic system. How election denialism could impact next Tuesday.
Plus, a gorgeously warm late fall afternoon throughout the region as we continue to see sunshine, but for how long? Those details are next as Mountain News at 5:30 starts now.
Dedicated to Southern and Eastern Kentucky, this is WYMT Mountain News at 5:30.
Good evening, I'm Steve Hensley. Preparations for Election Day are well underway for both the candidates and all of the poll workers who take care of and tabulate the votes. CBS's Skyler Henry has more from Capitol Hill.
The ballots are being prepped and the tables are set up, just waiting for Election Day when poll workers will begin counting the votes in jurisdictions across the country.
Rest assured that professional election administrators from both sides of the aisle will be working to validate and tabulate every valid vote.
But election officials warned that in many parts of the country, not all ballots will be counted on Election Day.
The only reason this has become a big issue recently and the time that it takes to tabulate all the votes is because our races are so close.
By now, most people have already made up their minds about who they'll vote for. So candidates are now doing everything they can to sway undecided voters and making sure their supporters actually make it to the polls. Campaigning in Arizona Wednesday night, former President Barack Obama said everyone needs to make sure their friends and family members get off the couch and vote.
You got to go and vote. So you got to pull them up. Make sure they're voting early or take them with you in person on Election Day.
On Election Day, just a few days away, get your friends, get your family, get your neighbors, get everybody you know, and get out and vote.
Former President Trump will campaign in person with Iowa Republicans tonight. Skyler Henry, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
President Biden is also on the campaign trail, stumping for New Mexico Governor Michelle Grisham. Federal prosecutors rested their case today against 5 alleged leaders of the far-right Oath Keepers militia group. It ends the initial phase of the first seditious conspiracy trial in more than a decade. Over 4 weeks, government witnesses testified to back up the Justice Department's case that the 5 defendants plotted to stop the Electoral College count on January 6, 2021. All 5 have pleaded not guilty. They will present evidence in their defense in the coming weeks. Some of them have suggested they will testify in their own defense. Many of those suspicions about the democratic process stem from former President Trump's false claims about the 2020 election. CBS's Scott McFarland talks about the effect on this year's races.
Our CBS News review of every federal and statewide race shows of the nearly 590 Republican candidates, there are 308 who we categorize as election deniers. Look at this. In the U.S. House, it's 238 of 436. It's a majority. In the U.S. Senate, again, it's a majority. In gubernatorial races, same number. In Secretary of State races nationwide, it's nearly half, and secretaries of state would help administer future elections. What do we mean by election denier? CBS News has a lengthy and formal definition. It includes those who've questioned the legitimacy of Biden's election, who won't acknowledge he's the duly elected president, those who say the election was stolen, and those who've repeated disproven claims of fraud. Among the 308 are candidates from 48 different states across the country, and it includes Republican incumbents who are questioning the validity of the very ballots upon which they were elected to. Scott McFarland, CBS News, New York.
U.S. Immigration and Custom Enforcement officials say the Canadian citizen who reportedly attacked Paul Pelosi, the husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, was in the U.S. illegally. David DePape is facing numerous state and federal charges, including attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon. Authorities say he broke into the Pelosi house Friday morning and struck Paul Pelosi with a hammer, fracturing his skull and injuring his arms and hand. DePape, who remains in custody, pleaded not guilty. Federal records say DePape came into the U.S. legally through Mexico in March. Canadians who come to the U.S. for personal reasons are usually able to stay for 6 months, but the Department of Human Services did not say when DePop's deadline expired.
Plenty of sunshine out there this afternoon as we turn this into evening, and it's feeling pretty good outside as well. Look outside from our camera at UVA Wise at this hour. We're still watching some of those wispy high clouds out in Southwest Virginia. Our usual cooler spot, they check in at 64 right now. Downtown Whitesburg, well, we had a bug on the camera earlier. Thank goodness that has gone away as the sun continues to set throughout the region tonight. Low to middle 70s. How about Irvin at 76, the warm spot right now? And yes, it has been a rather warm day in certain spots in the mountains. Even Clintwood's back up into the 70s after a brief dip into the upper 60s. All is quiet throughout the entire eastern third of the country for the most part, and that will continue into tonight. So as we head through the next hour, near 70 with those mostly clear skies and all clear skies as we head into our nighttime hours tonight at 59 at 10 o'clock, 53 overnight, falling into the upper 40s in some spots. However, we will be watching the potential for more warm and breezy conditions as we head into the early parts of our day on our Friday, and that will extend into the weekend as well. I'll have the very latest on those when we come back in just a little bit. Steve?
Evan, thank you. We told you yesterday about several schools closing because of illness this week. Today we have another one to add to the list. The June Buchanan School in Knott County will be closed tomorrow. The parents of Gabby Petito filed a $50 million wrongful death lawsuit against the Moab City, Utah Police Department today. They allege its officers were negligent in their interactions with the 22-year-old and her fiancé, Brian Laundrie, 2 weeks before her death. Petito and Laundrie embarked on a road trip through the American West last summer. Petito was reported missing after Laundrie returned to Florida. Her body was found several weeks later in the Grand Teton National Forest. A coroner ruled she died by strangulation. The lawsuit accuses the department and its officers of failing to protect Petito during an investigation into a domestic violence incident just weeks before her murder. The lawsuit says officers improperly determined Petito was the primary aggressor in the interaction and misapplied Utah's domestic abuse laws.
We'd have her back in a heartbeat because she's what's important. But we feel we need to bring justice because she could have been protected that day.
The city of Moab issued a statement denying responsibility for her murder and saying it would defend against the lawsuit. It said its officers could not see into the future based on this single interaction, and no one could have predicted the tragedy weeks later and hundreds of miles away. Laundrie's body was later found near a notebook in which he admitted killing Petito. Coming up on Mountain News at 5:30, the moratorium on student loan payments is scheduled to run out in January. Is your budget ready? Financial experts have tips on how to prepare for the restart.
Plus, keeping it sunny as the sun goes down tonight, but what about as we head into the weekend? The latest details on the way after this.
WYMT News app offers alerts on breaking stories.